over 3 years, I've been an avid runner, running in snow and in rain and in pain and in China. And over time, I've realized how running allows me to connect almost instantaneously with new people I meet. A few years ago, I went to Sen Lin Hu, a Chinese language immersion camp in Minnesota established by Concordia College. And there I met Binga, a man with the body of a runner and the mind of an artist. His accent and my less than standard Chinese skills make communication between us, at least in Chinese, very difficult. However, early every morning I would wake up and run to the outskirts of the village and back, and almost every morning I would see him too. And occasionally he would look at me with an expression of encouragement, joy, and understanding. Every time I couldn't help but smile. I felt as if he knew me and I knew him in a way that words could not describe. In learning a new language, there are all those complicated grammar structures, those confusing words and sounds, cultural nuances, complete and utter intimidation. However, in learning Chinese online, in Minnesota, in China, and at NCSSM, I discovered a language that transcends these otherwise intimidatingly high hurdles, the language of basic human emotions. For starters, let's begin with a definition. One obvious definition of language is the words, their pronunciation, and the methods of combining them used and understood by a community. Another, the audible, articulate, meaningful sound is produced by the action of the vocal organs. That one's pretty poetic for a dictionary definition, but the one I want you to consider is that language is a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings through the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or marks having understood meanings. Language isn't just the audible, articulate, meaningful sound produced by the action of the vocal organs. It's a systematic means of communication in many different realms of life. There is the English language, colloquial speech, vernacular, but there's also the language of mathematics, JavaScript, the language of movement, art, and dance, the language of birds and of beauty, and practically any sort of idea, activity, and event you can think of. One such language, transcending the boundaries of spoken language, is that of emotion. The idea of basic human emotion actually traces back to the Chinese with the Book of Rites, Ni Jing, a classic Confucian literary work, which, among other things, describes the 7 basic human emotions of joy, anger, sadness, fear, love, dislike, and like shared by all men and women. In the 1800s, Charles Darwin was one of the first to suggest that due to their origin and evolution, the outward expression of these emotions is common across cultures. In his book, The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animal. However, it wasn't until the 1900s that substantial evidence was provided for the universality of basic human emotions. Dr. Paul Ekman, an American psychologist who spearheaded the study of emotion, discovered that emotional understanding extended across cultures by expressions of happiness, anger, fear, disgust, sadness, and surprise. Ekman had originally believed that these universal emotional expressions were learned within a social context and, as a result, varied across cultures. However, after conducting multiple studies in which individuals from Borneo, Brazil, Japan, the United States, and the highlands of Papua New Guinea would associate pictures of facial expressions with words of emotion, discovered that these universal emotional expressions and their interpretations are not dependent on one's language or culture. All this is to say, despite the fact that there are hundreds of different languages in many different cultures, we are all connected and able to communicate across cultural and linguistic barriers with the languages we do hold in common. Words are not the only means of portraying meaning. Before even learning Chinese, the first language barrier I faced was in my own home. My older brother was diagnosed with spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy when he was born prematurely as a tiny 2-pound baby. Cerebral palsy caused an increase in his muscle tone, which not only makes it look like he lifts weights 24/7, but also makes his muscles so stiff that speaking, walking, eating, doing most basic tasks are very difficult. Until he was 12 years old, he could not speak words, but he did not lack language. He was not deprived of the ability to communicate. Snapshot into the past. Shaving cream and stuffed animals, an expression of complete and utter joy. Who needs words when you have shaving cream and stuffed animals? This was his way of communication. The smile from ear to ear, the laughter, the playful eyes, happiness, anger, fear, disgust, sadness, and surprise, all within his grasp and within my understanding. Many years later, I started learning Chinese my freshman year of high school through North Carolina virtual public schools. Coming into my freshman year, I've been told that a face-to-face Chinese class was to be established for the first time with help from a grant. However, the grant did not go through. That's how I ended up with a less than ideal situation of learning Chinese online. After 2 semesters, I'd learned the 4 basic tones, how to introduce myself and my family, and a few other random words and expressions such as hui shuo, recycling, and wuran, pollution. Without face-to-face interaction, or friends, or family who spoke Chinese, I was on the brink of giving up, feeling that finding any true understanding in Chinese language and culture was beyond my ability. However, that summer, after traveling by car, by bus, and by foot, I found myself in Minnesota at Senninhu village. At Senninhu, when talking to Jiajun, my teacher and mama who provided my Chinese name and constant encouragement in Binga, I, having only learned Chinese online for a year, struggled to formulate sentences or even remember simple words. For 4 weeks of learning and struggling along, my culminating project required crafting a poem in Chinese. Despite nerves and frustration, I completed my poem and presented it to campers, counselors, and Jiajun. By the last stanza, she was smiling with tears on her cheeks, and I was blushing knowing that I could communicate despite my lack of fluency. She never had to say a word for me to understand how she was feeling and her meaning. Though I couldn't remember nor understand all she said afterwards, I can remember her emotion and its meaning. This summer, I found myself actually in China for the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, a study abroad program funded by the U.S. State Department with the purpose of helping high school students learn critical languages not commonly taught in America. I left with a furthered understanding of this innate human connectedness, which, encapsulated in a singular moment, boiled down to a culminating hug and a momentary exchange of tears. On the last day in Chengdu, the capital of the Sichuan province where I resided for the summer, for a moment I sat on the couch in the living room of my host family's apartment. Moments later, my host mom sat next to me and told me that she couldn't take me to the airport. Without any words, I gestured for a hug with arms outstretched and hands beckoning. The next moment, we embraced. Upon release, I looked up to see her crying, and I began crying too. My head was racing, trying to think of the perfect words, perfect expression, perfect phrase, but my mind was blank. Those are the kinds of moments that even in English are hard to think of what to say. Quietly, I said thank you, and soon I left, touched by an unspoken understanding. In a world where misunderstanding is all too common, search for understanding. Use the universal language of basic human emotions to speak where words cannot. Use running to speak where words cannot. Use the expressive nature of poetry and art to speak where words cannot. Use shaving cream, stuffed animals. Use a hug or a smile or laughter. We speak words to express meaning, but we also express emotion for much the same reason. So continue to be the movers and shakers, runners, poets, brothers, sisters, human beings. Remember, you do not have to speak another language to understand another human being. Thank you.